Life often takes unexpected turns, and sharing my story feels necessary to help comprehend it all. I am Melissa, and at 35, I've endured more happiness and heartache than I could have imagined. My world has fallen apart, compelling me to piece it back together and understand how everything could have gone so wrong. A year ago, my divorce from Richard was finalized. Surprisingly, we managed to part ways civilly, contrary to what others might assume. Richard, still a wealthy man, was generous in our settlement, leaving me with our large suburban house where I live with Tommy, our son, and an apartment in the city that provides a steady rental income. The house, with its expansive backyard, was a playground for Tommy, while the apartment's prime location ensures finding tenants is never a concern. "Mommy, when is Daddy visiting?" Tommy would ask daily, a hopeful gleam in his big blue eyes. Even at 6, and despite the divorce, Richard remained a consistent part of his life. "This weekend, sweetheart. Remember, he promised a trip to the park," I would respond, thankful that some aspect of our fractured family remained intact. Every Saturday morning, Richard's expensive car would pull into our driveway at precisely 9 a.m. "You're doing a wonderful job with him, Mel," Richard once remarked after dropping Tommy off. "I know it's not easy, but you're managing better than most." My own family's situation was entangled. My parents divorced when I was 3. My mother remarried soon after. I vividly recall the confusion of a new man asserting himself as my dad, followed by the birth of Jessica, my half-sister. A year later, growing up, Jessica and I maintained a respectfully distant relationship due to our different fathers, personalities, and lives. "Why don't you and Aunt Jessica hang out like other sisters?" Tommy asked one dinner, avoiding his peas. "Sometimes sisters are different, honey, and that's okay," I explained, likening it to not always wanting to play with every classmate. But he noted, "She never comes to my birthday parties," and reluctantly consumed the peas. "Jessica is busy," I conceded, though in truth, Jessica often harbored resentment over our family's dynamics, especially considering my father's financial support through college while her own father struggled. Reflecting now, the warning signs were evident. Her subtle eye rolls at my new car mentions, her backhanded compliments about my lucky marriage, and her sudden unavailability for family events at our house. "Your sister's just jealous, Sarah," a friend had pointed out, asserting some can't bear others' success. I often dismissed such thoughts, naive in my belief that we could someday bridge the gap. Everything shifted when my father's mother, my grandmother, passed away. She lived simply on the town's edge, a home where window boxes brimmed with geraniums, and the screen door creaked as it had for decades. Her funeral was modest and dignified, as she would prefer. What stunned me was inheriting everything in her will, the house and her savings. I hadn't known she even had savings. "Your grandmother always favored you," my father noted at the funeral, his eyes red as we stood in the cemetery. "She cherished your Sunday visits with Tommy, even post-divorce. She'd say, 'That girl has a kind heart, just like her father.'" Watching Tommy place daisies from our garden on her grave, I wished he'd had more time with her. "Mommy, is great-grandma in heaven?" he asked, slipping his hand in mine. "Yes, love, and she's probably baking her famous cookies there." Processing this inheritance, my parents then summoned me for an important family discussion. As I arrived, the tension was palpable, the air filled with my mother's signature scent. The aroma of pot roast pervaded the air. Yet the kitchen's atmosphere was undeniably tense. My mother asked me to sit down at the well-worn wooden kitchen table, where traces of my sister Jessica's teenage years were etched permanently as scratches, a testament to our family's history. As she poured coffee into my favorite mug, she started the conversation in that familiar tone I'd learned to be cautious of since my childhood, addressing the matter of my grandmother's house. I sensed defensiveness rising within me as I wrapped my hands around the warm mug for comfort. My stepfather leaned forward, his chair protesting under his weight, and pointed out the substantial assets I now possessed: the house from Richard, a rental apartment, and the latest addition, my grandmother's house. His words lingered heavily in the kitchen. My mother nodded in agreement, her manicured nails tapping rhythmically on her coffee cup, a sound that only added to my unease. Understanding Jessica's struggles was familiar territory. My mother slipped into her practiced persuasive tone. She highlighted the limited space and low salary my sister was dealing with, renting a tiny apartment akin to a closet. I remained silent, mesmerized by the steam curling off my untouched coffee. My mother proposed, "Wouldn't it be equitable for Jessica to inherit our grandmother's house?" She gently reached across to pat my hand, reminding me of my blessings while Jessica's challenges loomed large. My stepfather chimed in again, wearing a smile he mistakenly thought persuasive. To him, the property wasn't particularly valuable, suggesting that I wouldn't be sacrificing much by giving it away. The thought of how much it would mean to Jessica was tactically laid before me. I sat there, stunned by their boldness, yet feeling the familiar twinge of guilt. It was true, I possessed more than Jessica, and the house held little monetary value. Their expectations weighed on me like a tangible force. When I inquired whether they discussed this with Jessica, their exchanged glances already betrayed the answer. My mother, in haste, replied they wanted to consult me first, but acknowledged Jessica's recent hardships, including her breakup with a boyfriend from the bank, something I hadn't known. In a stark realization, I grasped how little I currently knew about Jessica's life, with our last substantial conversation perhaps around Christmas time, dominated by trivial matters and job grievances. Undisclosed to my parents was the unsettling reality of Tommy's declining health. Initially subtle signs like unexplained bruises and persistent fatigue became glaring warnings. Despite a history of sickness from birth and doctors attributing it to a slow-building immune system, my instincts as a mother sensed a deeper issue. The truly devastating news of blood cancer only unfolded when he turned 4. Dr. Martinez, in her office maternally adorned with children's drawings, delivered the grave diagnosis: acute lymphoblastic leukemia. She calmly slid over the test results, emphasizing the immediate need for treatment. I clung to Tommy's small hand, seeking stability. When I questioned his prognosis, Dr. Martinez, though tactful, revealed the troubled outlook through her gaze. Subsequent months became a whirlwind of hospital visits, chemotherapy, and restless nights beside Tommy's hospital bed. Richard, notwithstanding our divorce, persistently supported us, voicing his readiness to secure the best possible care. The relentless cycles stretched me thin between medical obligations, job responsibilities, and familial pressure over the house. Perhaps that's why I conceded easily when my parents suggested transferring the house to Jessica. It seemed minor compared to the monumental fight for Tommy's life. Between Tommy's treatments, I handed over the keys to Jessica on an ordinary afternoon, with plans to finalize paperwork once life found a rhythm again. I anticipated Tommy's upcoming doctor's appointment. Jessica threw her arms around me, her gratitude overflowing. I could barely focus on her ecstatic words as her strong perfume filled the air and created a wave of nausea. "Oh my God, thank you. Thank you," she exclaimed, embracing me for the first time in years. "I'm planning the best housewarming party in a month. You'll come, right? And bring Tommy, if he's feeling better." I hardly paid attention to her excitement. The image of Tommy's pale face haunted me, along with his new tendency to ignore his toys and the park he once loved. "Mommy, am I going to get better?" he whispered one night from his hospital bed. "Of course, sweetheart," I replied, as reassuringly as possible, stroking his thin hair. "You are the bravest boy I know." Tommy's condition began to show signs of improvement with a new treatment. His appetite returned, he seemed healthier, and the doctors were hopeful. "Can we go to the park this weekend, Mommy?" he asked eagerly one morning. My heart leapt. It was his first request to go outside in months. "Yes, darling," I promised. "And we can even feed the ducks like before." "Can Daddy join us?" he asked. "Of course," I smiled. But just a week later, my world shattered again. A call from the hospital at 3 a.m. shook me out of restless sleep. Tommy had a high fever after being admitted, but they assured me it was just a minor setback. "Mrs. Peterson," the nurse's gentle yet ominous voice said, You need to come immediately. Tommy's condition has worsened dramatically. Panic rose within me, and although I barely remember the drive, a blur of rain-soaked streets and speeding past red lights, I knew I had to get to my son. By the time I arrived, it was too late. The doctors' solemn faces spoke volumes about the fight they were losing. What followed were hours of medical jargon, desperate attempts, ending in grim silence. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Peterson," Dr. Martinez's voice faltered. "We did everything we could. His body was just too weak." Stunned, I sat by Tommy's side, holding his lifeless little hand as dawn broke, incapable of accepting that my brave, beautiful boy was gone. When Richard arrived, his face was ashen. "Mel," he murmured, enveloping me in his arms. My grief was impenetrable, but I somehow texted Jessica, "Tommy died. Funeral in 3 days." Her response, "Okay." The single lowercase word devoid of empathy or grief sent a chill through me. Later, when I called my mom, craving her comfort, her reaction was even more incomprehensible. Jessica said, she remarked absent-mindedly, "Honey, about the funeral, we can't attend. We have other plans that day." Bewildered, I nearly dropped the phone. "Other commitments?" I repeated, incredulous. "Yes, dear, you see Jessica's housewarming is then, and I've promised to help. It would be such a hassle to reschedule," she explained, almost dismissive. "Mom, this is Tommy's funeral, your grandson." I cried, my voice trembling. "I know, dear. It's a tragedy, but life carries on. Jessica's been planning for weeks, and we can't let down her guests." Everything felt surreal. How could my own mother prioritize a party over her grandchild's funeral? Shaking with disbelief, I phoned Jessica. "What the hell are you thinking?" I demanded, my voice barely steady. "Why the party on the day of Tommy's funeral?" "Because that's the day I want," she responded impassively, amid the background noise of party preparations. "Jessica, this is my son, your nephew. The little boy who made you birthday cards every year." The frustration in her voice was evident when she retorted, "Why should I? It's merely a funeral. He's already gone. It makes no difference to him when he's buried. I'm alive. And I'm eager to rejoice in my new house. Do you have any idea how long I've anticipated this moment?" I heard a crash from her end as I tried to process her words. The phone slipped from my numb fingers, hitting the kitchen floor with a clatter. In that instance, something within me fractured and was replaced by a more resilient, icy resolve. I recalled the numerous occasions when Jessica supported me through Tommy's illness, her vows to always be there. Was it all just a charade? The funeral itself was a hazy mix of solemn black attire and hushed sympathies. Richard stood beside me, a steady presence, offering comfort by squeezing my hand whenever grief seemed overwhelming. My mother and stepfather made a brief appearance, staying just 10 minutes before mumbling apologies about needing to assist Jessica with her party preparations. As they departed, I watched their car pull away, a cold void filling the space where my heart used to be. My mother barely looked at me as she busied herself with her phone, likely coordinating plans with Jessica. During the reception, my cousin Sarah whispered, "Did you hear about Jessica's party? She invited half the town. None of us planned to attend, of course. It's inappropriate. We told her so, but she insisted." As she spoke, a plan formed in my mind. Legally, the house still belonged to me. Jessica might hold the keys, but not the deed or legal rights to host anything there. At precisely 6 p.m., knowing Jessica's party would be underway, I made 2 calls. First, I reported trespassers to the police, providing them the address of my grandmother's home and explaining the unauthorized use of my property. The second call was to my lawyer, confirming the legal documentation was intact. "Everything's as it should be," he assured me. "The house is still legally yours." I arrived at the scene alongside the police. Music blared from inside, a pop song celebrating good times. People visible through the windows dancing and laughing. There, Jessica stood at the center, playing the perfect hostess in a house that was technically mine. The officers were professional and efficient. I presented my papers, pointing out where the deed clearly showed my ownership. "This is my property," I declared, as the music abruptly stopped. Chaos unfolded beautifully. Jessica's expression morphed from confusion to fury as guests, unwilling to risk police confrontation, exited hastily. Her meticulously arranged food lay forsaken. Decorations rendered cheap and unsubstantial in the moment's harsh light. "You gave me this house," Jessica screamed, tears and mascara streaking. "Tell them, Mom. Tell them you promised it to me." Our mother and stepfather tried to defend her, but words meant nothing without legal backing, helplessly watching Jessica's perfect party dissolve into disorder. Calmly, I stood, challenging. "Show me where I've transferred ownership legally." When all others had left, Jessica's rage erupted, her face contorted, all pretense of sibling camaraderie stripped. "You entitled snob," she screamed, toppling a vase, water and petals scattering. "You've always had it all. Wealth, sympathy, a grand home. I despise you. I'm glad your husband left. Glad Brad is dead." Her words reverberated in the suddenly silent room. I turned to Mother, seeking shock, but found instead her standing by Jessica, face hard with fury. "You've always been selfish, Melissa," she spat. "Thinking you're above everyone, just for marrying rich, or having a sick child who garnered sympathy." Waves of cold clarity washed over me. Despite finite support over years, $1,500 monthly, holiday gifts, surprise packages, last year's cruise, mother's kitchen renovation, stepfather's car repairs, they consistently chose. In a voice steady with cold finality, I began, "Let me make this very clear. From this point forward, all the financial support stops. Every single cent, the monthly deposits, the generous gifts you've gotten used to, it's done." My mother's face turned ashen. "You wouldn't," she stammered. "Wouldn't I?" I replied, every word deliberate. "You chose a housewarming party over attending your grandson's funeral. You defend those who celebrated my child's death. Just watch me." My stepfather intervened, face flushed with urgency. "Melissa, let's not be rash. Words said in anger aren't always meant." I cut him off. "I mean it all. You won't see another penny from me, ever. Get out of my house, all of you. Never contact me again." Desperation cracked my mother's voice, reality dawning. "But we're your parents," she pleaded. "No," I answered firmly. "Parents don't make the choices you made. Parents don't defend calls made for celebration following a child's passing. You're just people I once knew." As Jessica left, her voice edged with threat but eyes masking fear, she said, "This isn't over." However, I had severed their main financial support. "You'll regret this," she added. The next day, social media lit up with my mother's posts and Jessica's tearful claims about homelessness, conveniently omitting their choice of a party over Tommy's funeral. But soon the truth emerged. Our relatives had witnessed it all. The funeral, the party invites, the inhumane timing. "Who throws a party on the day of their nephew's funeral?" asked my cousin Sarah online. "Who helps organize that party instead of attending their grandson's funeral? Shame on all of you," she added. The backlash was swift and fierce. Jessica's posts pleading sisterly betrayal met only revulsion and condemnation. Once the extent of my financial support surfaced, comments grew harsher, forcing Jessica to delete her social accounts amid the rising outrage. Months went by as I slowly mended, guided by weekly therapy sessions with Dr. Anderson. Beyond grieving for Tommy, I was mourning the family I once believed I had. But then, my neighbor Mrs. Jenkins alerted me to vandalism at my grandmother's house, glass shattering, windows broken. Thanks to the security cameras I'd thankfully installed, footage revealed Jessica methodically smashing every window, her rage uncontained, flinging stones through the panes. This led me to press charges, without hesitation. My mother phoned, pleading for leniency, hysteria lacing her voice. "You'll ruin her career," she sobbed. "She'll lose her city administration job. Think of her future." I coldly retorted, the same way she thought about Tommy's funeral, before hanging up. The viral video led to Jessica's dismissal. The court imposed heavy fines and penalties on her, and news circulated of her unemployment, residing again with our parents. Some deem it harsh, but I bear no remorse. Every visit to Tommy's grave recalls Jessica's contemptuous words branding my son her brat and her merriment on his burial day. Forgiveness isn't possible for some actions. Recently, when my therapist asked if I'd contemplate reconciliation, my response was resolute. They're not my family anymore. Gazing out of the office window, where spring trees began to unfold, I expressed my newfound understanding. Family doesn't act as they did. I'm rediscovering life day by day. Tommy educated me on boundless love, remaining unbroken even amid profound despair. Jessica taught me relentless hate, indiscriminately destructive. Sometimes, the family you're given isn't the family meant for you. In my silent home, scanning over Tommy's photos, I carry a conviction. I chose wisely. Certain bridges once sundered must stay as cinders, for truly honoring those who've departed necessitates severing ties with those who disrespected them.